Welcome, everybody, for joining us for yet another webinar. This month, I am very happy to announce that Shawn Hilgendorf has joined us. He is the Vice President of Government Affairs for the District's Association of Realtors, otherwise known as DCAR. Shawn and I have worked together for quite some time, most notably the past year in a new role, but he has spent a lot of time at the Wilson Building over the years and well informed on what's coming down the pipeline, where things are at. And so when it comes to finding a guest to talk about the budget, the election, and the pending legislation, I didn't go much further than asking Shawn to join us. So today I want to expand upon that. We're going to touch on all of those matters, and we're going to leave a little time at the end for a Q&A. So as we go through some of these bullet points, if there's anything specific you would like for us to expand upon, or we may need to clarify or didn't get as deep into as you're hoping, feel free to put the notes or the questions into that section. The chat is not enabled. We're not going to be monitoring it, but we will circle back and cover the Q&A at the tail end. My name's Conrad Bennett. I have been working with independent landlords, helping them facilitate the role as the landlord and help provide the overwhelming majority of the affordable housing stock in the district, mostly those independent landlords that are looking to convert their primary residence to an investment and a rental. But at the same time, obviously, there's plenty of investors in the city that are looking for those opportunities one way or another. Shawn, on the other hand, has certainly spent more time dealing with the advocacy and the legislation. We're going to talk a lot about that advocacy because there's a lot going on and always will be in this tenant-friendly jurisdiction. But I don't want to put words in his mouth. So, Shawn, why don't you introduce yourself to the people that are joining us or watching us on the recording?
Thank you, Conrad, and thank you for having me back. I'm always excited to have the opportunity to talk about the work that we're doing here at DCAR on behalf of our industry. As you mentioned, ever since becoming the Vice President of Government Affairs for the DC Association of Realtors, I've been spending almost every waking moment down at the Wilson Building fighting for budget investments, fighting for fair housing policy, fighting for our ability to maintain and provide affordable and available housing in the district, which is seemingly always at threat. As you also mentioned, the Wilson Building is nothing new to me. Before taking on this role, I served at the council for 11 years under 3 different council members. And so it certainly is like a second home, and I'm always happy to talk about what's going on there.
Yeah. And to that extent, obviously, there's a lot of relationship-based advocacy. Being able to participate in the conversations is critical. And my role as on the public policy committee for the District's Association of Realtors, we're really trying to keep tabs on a lot of the legislation that's coming through, being discussed, concerns that people have. But at the end of the day, ultimately, we can provide our opinions and our conversations. But the council members and the mayor are ultimately the ones that are going to push things through. But it's great to be in the room. It's great to have those conversations. And we have advocacy days. We are constantly providing feedback. We provide testimony, all of which Shawn helps orchestrate. But at the same time, many of those in our industry are providing those notes and expanding upon what it looks like in real time for those that are actually the practitioners, right? And
Absolutely.
so that feedback's essential. And a lot of times it's going to be critical coming from our landlords, our homeowners, those that are actually going to be impacted. And so there are opportunities to even for the individuals to testify. It's not always just us or industry professionals. So let's talk about some of the budget first. I think that you can expand upon this, but I think that there were some major wins that we helped navigate towards and orchestrate in terms of some of the wins, but there's certainly going to still be some ongoing challenges. And I think that it's no new news that there is budget shortfalls, right? Or and concerns and things needed to get cut. But there are some major wins that came out of it. So why don't you start at the top and work your way through? And if there's anything worth pausing on, feel free to take the extra time to do so.
Thank you, Conrad. I think it's no surprise to anybody that, it seems like we say this every year, but this was the most challenging budget cycle that we've seen in many years. And the reason why is because district government revenues are essentially flat due to federal government actions impacting our market, including our housing market. And so that meant that the mayor, when she proposed the budget and the council, when they were reviewing it, had to make some really tough choices. But we were there at every step of the way, and we managed to get a budget, get some things out of this that kept the council from having severe negative impacts on our industry. For the second year in a row, we were able to fight back all proposed property tax, real estate transfer tax, or income tax increases. And so that was a big win. We thought that taxes were going to go up in a meaningful way in this budget, and we were able to hold those off for now. We were able to get a partial restoration of the home purchase assistance program, over $600,000. We were able to get restored there at the council. Importantly, we were able to get $1.7 million in assistance with security deposits for DCHA voucher holders, split over the 2 fiscal years. At the Office of the Tenant Advocate, we were able to get another $200,000 for their emergency housing assistance program. This is a program that helps tenants who've been displaced by fires, flood, government closures, that kind of thing. So they're able to pay for short-term hotel stays, storage. The money gets used every year whenever disaster strikes. And so it was good to be able to put a little bit more money on that. And then, one of the things that the council passed recently was the vacant to vibrant bill. And when that bill went into effect, we started seeing some real impacts on our industry, particularly for properties that were listed for sale. We're getting placarded as vacant and having all of the challenges that come along with that in the middle of a sell process. And so we were able, in working with the chairman, to make an adjustment through the budget to remove the vacant property registration requirement for properties that are listed on MLS for a period of 6 months. That's not everything that we want to do around vacant property enforcement, but it certainly was an important step to reduce the challenges that bill has had.
Yeah. And so for the wins, obviously, to expand upon that last one, for those that may not be in this practice every day, imagine putting a for sale sign out in front of your property, DC catching that, changing your tax rate, you get an accelerated tax bill, which you probably don't find about until you're almost at the settlement table and sometimes at the settlement table. And so that has had a big impact. And so just being able to get that back in and creating a little carve out for it is a huge help for many that are getting working their way through the sale of the property. And I would ask maybe a quick question because the reference to the security deposit, the assistance towards the DHCA vouchers. I know that this had passed, but at the same time, it doesn't sound as if funds are necessarily available. Can you expand a little bit about how that's spread out over 2 fiscal periods and where that funds will become available?
Yeah, so originally, or towards the very end of this process, it was going to be $1.7 million starting in fiscal year 27, which starts on October 1st. One of the things that the chairman did at the very end is accelerate $700,000 of that security deposit assistance funding into the current fiscal year before October 1st so that it could be made available a little bit faster. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily available today. Agencies are a little slow, so we'll need to go back and engage with DCHA to see when people could start taking advantage of that.
Okay, that was one question that actually came up since we talked last, and so I'm glad to know that it's on the radar and but at the same time not yet fully available. So those who are experiencing those challenges, there are some workarounds, and I'm ultimately happy to talk about them for anybody that has questions later. All right, balls back in your court.
All right. So on the other side of the ledger, every budget has its challenges, and so we were pretty excited about some proposals the mayor had to reduce certificate of occupancy fees, and several other housing friendly budget support act subtitles that she had proposed. Unfortunately, the council removed that, so we're not going to get those benefits going forward. One of the other things that the council did is a couple of years ago, they passed the Pets and Housing Amendment Act, which would do a few things. One is that it would cap the security deposit that you can charge for pets, 15% of monthly rent, cap the amount that you can charge in pet rent for each pet at 1% of monthly rent for dogs, and no more than 1% of the rent for all the other common household pets. And starting on October 1st, ban breed, size, and weight restrictions on dogs as well. That legislation does permit reasonable pet policies and limitations on the number of pets that a housing provider can permit for their tenants to have. Now, that bill, even though it passed some time ago, was not in effect due to what's called a subject to appropriations clause that was passed alongside of it. That clause has now been removed. So alongside the budget, that we're going to where those security deposit caps and pet rent caps are going into effect. So for housing providers, this is something that you need to be paying attention to for compliance. And then soon, these inability to have breed, size, and weight restrictions is going to go into effect in the next several months as well. And so I really encourage people to pay attention to this. It was fairly quietly done that they removed the barrier to this bill taking effect. A few other things, the mayor had proposed a downtown building conversion tax abatement to help create more housing downtown. The council reduced that. And the council also cut funding, which we were unhappy about, to the single family rehabilitation program. They cut about $600,000 in that. And, unfortunately, that program, which helps folks stay in their homes with home repairs, it has had significant delays and administrative failures. There's been some underspending in the program because of how slow it runs. So the council, looking at that program, chose to, rather than working with the mayor to fix it, to reduce the amount of investment proposed. And so certainly more work that needs to be done there. I want to also mention, because it's been getting a lot of press, that they did include a 20-cent surcharge on carrier for hire trips for deliveries. That's been getting a lot of attention. This is not usually something that our organization gets involved in. We don't directly represent delivery drivers. But it has caused some backlash. DoorDash, who would be largely impacted by this, and other similar companies have advocated for legislation on Capitol Hill that would ban the district council from raising or lowering taxes without active congressional approval. And that certainly raises concerns about our home rule. Our national association does have active lobbying effort, one of the strongest in the country on Capitol Hill. We do think that legislation is unlikely to move forward in the Senate. But it's something that we're monitoring really closely, and where it came from was this 20-cent surcharge on delivery drivers.
Yep.
And
And we're going to get
finally,
into one federal thing in a little bit. But there is also this one about expecting tax
yeah,
increases in the future.
yeah,
Now, I know that we've fought hard to be able to prevent those real estate, property taxes, income taxes, et cetera, et cetera. But I think in the conversation we had the other day, it's a precursor that we do anticipate that there are going to be some adjustments going forward. And I think that there's a couple specific that have already been on the books for a bit, or at least presented previously, presumably may be worth markup or mention. But can you expand upon Fruman? And I think you said it was Nadeau's bill, right?
yeah. Thank you. So while we've managed to avoid major tax increases the last 2 years, the situation that the district government is finding itself in is that our budget is structurally out of balance in future years. While the budget is balanced as passed for fiscal year 27, we're facing some significant budget gaps to meet the council's preferred spending levels in future years. And so, across the board on the council, what you've seen is a lot of folks speaking about how they expect that next year to balance those budgets, they are going to be raising taxes. There will be a big hearing on proposals in the fall to set themselves up for legislation moving forward as part of the next year's budget. A couple things that we are tracking closely. Fruman, for a number of years, has been proposing a PA to tear tax on properties over $2.5 million that are vacant for more than half the year. So not someone's primary residence, and increasing the property tax on those. And Councilmember Nadeau has proposed a wealth tax, which is essentially a local net investment income tax on households whose household income is greater than $500,000 or individuals with income greater than $400,000, applying a net investment income surcharge on passive income from property and stocks. Both of those are things that we're going to be tracking very carefully as we go into next year. Our role at DCAR if is to make sure that if the council is considering tax increases, that we try to not have those have some serious negative effects on our housing market and our industry if we can do anything to stop it.
Yep. Perfect. All right. Well, that's a good transition into the next part because there are a few things that are catching headlines. And while many of those things may fly under the radar for most, I couldn't help but catch a couple of things that the mayor had proposed, what, 2 weeks ago now, maybe three.
Yep.
Now, granted, we do know that she's in her final year in office. And so, but I wanted to bring them up so that people know where and how these things could be considered because ultimately, I think that this is like Rental Act 2.0 kind of a approach,
Right.
and potentially for the balancing because we're always looking for the fair and balanced, right? Owner, landlord, tenant, ultimately trying to find that happy medium. But these first two are local. The third, the 21st century roads to housing, is going to be federal. But let's go for the first two and then we'll talk about the federal. Um, Housing Investment Protection Act. Ultimately, I know that it was working to preserve the affordable housing and impact investment decisions, but go ahead and expand upon how that balancing act's looking with this legislation,
Sure. And as you mentioned,
proposed legislation.
yeah, and as you mentioned, I'm referring to this as Rental Act 2.0. I'm not sure if that's the mayor's preferred branding or not. But this is a housing omnibus bill that she recently introduced at the council. It's now pending before the housing committee for consideration in the fall. This is a big omnibus bill. But a couple of the things that it's looking to do are to limit the definition of tenants under TOPA to those under current or expired written leases who are entitled to occupy the housing and are liable to pay rent. So narrowing the definition of tenants who have TOPA rights, where TOPA still applies. Expanding the district's opportunity to purchase to allow the mayor to purchase new buildings even when tenants can't under the Rental Act. So the mayor can purchase new buildings to create affordability or meet her other goals. It also purports, this is something they tried in the Rental Act and it didn't pass. It purports to establish a 60-day timeline for eviction cases in Superior Court. I say it purports to do that because the Superior Court is overwhelmed, and whether or not they're able to meet those timelines is certainly an open question. And so, it also makes delivery and receipt of eviction notices easier. There's a number of provisions in this bill. Now, and what I will say is, as you mentioned, Conrad, the mayor is in sort of a lame duck. We did just have a very dramatic Democratic primary, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And what that means is that she doesn't quite have the pull that she did, in my estimation, at the council when she moved the first Rental Act. And so, this is going to be going to Robert White's committee. Robert is going to be going over to Congress soon. And he has his own legislative priorities. And so, while there may be pieces of this that move forward, I am not as optimistic here as I was on Rental Act 1.0 that we're going to get this whole package through by the end of the year.
Okay. And just as a side note, the court system has been a concern, and I think that the 60 days is awesome conceptually, though I rarely expect that would be fulfilled. But in terms of the courts, those judges are federally appointed, right? And so
That's
their
right.
capacity is a federal conversation, not necessarily the whims of the district or the intentions of the district. But at the same time, there's a lot of capacity that's changed, and I've covered that on previous webinars with attorneys about how they are processing the cases and the workload in which they're able to do so. And a lot has obviously changed post-pandemic.
Mhm.
That if there were to be some shifts back, I think that it would get closer to the original expectations 6 years removed, to be able to negotiate and be able to come up with a few things. But the remote hearings is a conversation that I think needs to continue to be had, versus in person, which has been generally more productive in decades past. Of course, we need to continue to promote that and keep our voice heard. Let's illegal occupancy, got those two covered. How about let's go to the federal then, the 21st century road to housing. Now, one thing that I kind of had been mentioning, and I think I said as like a tagline for it earlier, but federal policy can certainly open doors, but the local government decides whether you walk through them, right? And so passed earlier this month, right, a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
And of course, it attacks or not attacks. It addresses a lot of the concerns that will be heard throughout the country, but I think DC is a little different. And that's something we can tease out a little bit. But what are the positives that are coming out of it, and are there any challenges that you see that could have an impact on the district, or those in the DC metro area?
Sure. So, this bill is a big deal. And for our National Association of Realtors, it's one of the largest pieces of housing legislation that they've supported, that's passed Congress in decades. So it is a big deal. It got a lot of attention. The process was very messy. The president apparently was one of the only elected officials in the country who didn't support this bill. The bill was originally moved by Senator Elizabeth Warren and supported on a bipartisan basis in both the House and the Senate, which is one of the hardest things to do in politics these days. And so, I do think that there's a big victory here. And I think that in the details of this bill, it's not the yawn that the president suggested that it was. But you're right. It is giving us opportunities as a state and local government, some of which are more relevant to more rural places or our neighboring jurisdictions in DC. But I do think that one of our roles here as advocates is going to be working with the incoming mayoral administration in the district to try to take advantage of the tools this bill offers, because she has set goals for expanded housing production, and there are some things in here that we think will be really helpful. Among them is prioritizing grants for housing construction and preservation and opportunity zones, supporting grants and loans to repair aging housing stock, allowing CDBG grant funds to be used for new housing construction, streamlining environmental reviews for housing development, providing grants for housing planning and implementation, flexible funding for housing supply innovation, and encouraging pre-approved housing designs to speed the permitting process. And so, what they're trying to do is move a lot of money. Um, they're trying to incentivize local jurisdictions to establish policies that support housing production, and they're trying to speed the process of permitting and reviews, to the extent that the federal government can do that. And so, this is a very large bill. We're going to be talking about it more word. There are other pieces of this that are maybe more active in Virginia or Maryland around modular housing and manufactured housing construction and distribution. There's a bunch of pieces around allowing small mortgages of under $100,000 and encouraging those. Some of those things are probably not as meaningful here in the district, but I do think it's an important bill to follow.
Yeah. And of course, the expanded financing options for first-time home buyers, the maybe some development capital that can improve project feasibility, ultimately things that are going to go along with that as well. So definitely opportunities here in the districts as well as federally, but I think that it's just what we'll be able to capitalize as a whole. All right, so those are some things that may or may not have been on many's radar, probably some more than others, but at the same time, there's a handful that we're tracking, and some of which have already gone into effect, some of which we are closely monitoring, and many of which we've given our feedback and opinion on. And so these are the ones I want to make sure that we've been keeping an eye on, and everybody's aware that we are sharing our opinions regularly. So the Transparent Rates and Utility Expenses Amendment Act, I recognize that there, specifically when it comes to some utility billing and everything along those lines, making sure that the residents know what they're getting into is a big takeaway from this. You want, if there's going to be utilities that are their responsibility, you got to let them know in advance, right? And so um, that is something that many are going to need to make sure you're aware of, especially if you're going to begin marketing, drafting leases, etc. Be ahead of it and be aware of it. Is there anything more to add for those that are key takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, so this bill would, and it's pending markup right now, in the committee on, and Councilmember Allen's committee. We've been engaged on it. It will require more explicitly disclosure upfront of how you're going to be doing your utility billing, and importantly, if you if you don't meet those disclosure requirements, there could be consequences in making your utility charges unenforceable against your tenant. And so as these new bills come into effect, as we continue to massage what they're going to look like, it's important to track what your obligations are and what new tenant rights would be established, so that you're not on the hook for paying all of those utility charges.
And that leads into the water billing, because quite frankly, many owners know that water specifically can be put as a lien against your property and generally remains in the owner's name because of that. Um, and so making sure that this bill is expanded upon is talking about if the owners don't pay. They don't want to necessarily have the implications upon the tenant about the potential for disconnection, whereas they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and somebody else may not be. I've seen a couple of versions of this, but I think that it's still in markup, and I think we're still having conversations about the potential for implementation. But let me know if it's a little further along than I'm remembering.
So, on all of these utility bills, there's a bunch of them. So, what's clear is that council members and residents in the district, and frankly, housing providers too, are very concerned about escalating utility costs across the board. And what you're seeing is that there's a whole raft of very large bills trying to get at utility billing and affordability issues in the district. And this is a big one. You're right; it's still pending markup. We're expecting some kind of combined bill to move out of committee in the fall, and we've been engaging with the council on that. This one is really a comprehensive reform of billing and accounting practices for DC water. That would impact property owners and tenants. And a couple of the things that it would do is prohibit DC water from disconnecting water service whenever it's hot or cold, under 32 or over 95, and expand opportunities if the owner is delinquent. If the owner is delinquent on paying their water bills, it would expand opportunities for tenants or condo owners to receive water and sewer services themselves. And that could definitely have some significant operational impacts. The bill, I think, needs some adjustment to have that even be possible in the way that they're talking about. But it would be a pretty dramatic impact if you become delinquent on your water bills here, under this legislation.
Yeah, and for the same reason that many owners want to be able to have access to that water bill specific to monitor and make sure that the payments are being made, even if the resident is responsible for paying it. Think about a single family home. You're going to keep the bill in your name. Many owners do chargebacks after the bill's been paid. Sometimes there's a capacity to put them into the tenant's name and monitor and make sure they're doing it. But at the same time, step in if it's not being attended to. This kind of reverses the conversation it had about the owner not meeting their portion of the obligation. And it certainly could become problematic when the residents aren't paying rent, but at the same time, bills need to get paid. That's the truth. All right. Now, talking about unpaid, the clarifying licensing enrichment, enriching all neighborhoods, the clean amendment, This is an easy one. Basically, if you owe it more than $1,000 due to fines and penalties, presumably you're not going to be able to obtain your licensing. Now, with most that go through the licensing process, you're going to have to get a clean hands bill that says you owe less than 100. So I was not really sure how this is much different. But I also have to look at the wider scope, and there's other businesses that are impacted and presumably needing to go through renewal or an extension of their license. Unless anything to expand upon that, or did that pretty much cover
Yeah, I mean,
basis?
so recently, the Department of Buildings is not that new, is not that old of an agency, and so typically, if you owe the district government $1,000 for almost anything, you can't get clean hands, and that's going to impact your licensure.
Yeah.
There was not that was not the case recently for notices of infraction to DOB, and
Mm.
so this bill is including that under the clean hands requirement explicitly, where there was previously a gap in the law. And so, it is very important if you owe um, those fines and you need to renew your license to know that those are going to be attached. I expect that some version of this bill is likely going to pass. Right now, it's still pending a hearing.
All right. All right. I think that the extreme heat eviction protection is already passed, as if those who get to that point don't already know the city and uses the U.S. Marshals to orchestrate evictions. They won't do it if it's too cold or if there's precipitation in the forecast. But now it won't be conducted if it's going to be over 95 degrees, right? Be mindful of that and wary and keep an eye on the weather as most would regardless when you accelerate through the court process and are getting to the eviction level and be mindful of that during the notices. Let's talk about the portable tenant screening report, which I don't think is passed, but we've expressed concern. I think there was opposition to the fact that their proposal that tenants could apply once and it would be kind of a universal application. But from an administrative perspective, I think that comes with some concerns and potential liability. And so we've opposed anything to add to this one.
Yeah, so the idea here is that tenants would be able to reuse screening reports and bring them to additional housing providers that they're considering renting from. As you mentioned, DCAR has raised concerns about the potential for fraud in that not all housing providers are using the same system. It further restricts their control over access to information about their tenants and makes it harder for housing providers to recoup the costs that they have in managing their own liability. And so we've raised some concerns about this proposal around allowing tenants to carry with them their own tenant screening reports.
All right. Well, I'll skip over the pets and housing because we've already touched on that one. How about the Condo Insurance Amendment Act? I know that there are expectations that those deductibles will rise, and the individual homeowners need to make sure that they have policies that are going to be able to bridge that gap. Is this is still pending markup? Yes.
That's right.
And in the end, ultimately, I do believe that it's going to increase that significantly because from what, 5,000 to 25,000?
Yeah, so it'll increase the amount of the deductible responsibility for a unit owner from $5,000 to $25,000 for damages in their unit, and increase the individual unit owner's insurance requirements to $25,000 to match that, and $500,000 or more in personal liability, as well as coverages for loss of use and coverage for the condo association's deductible. And so what this looks like is a reapportionment of risk between the individual condo owner and the condo association. And it stems from concerns about condo associations' finances in the district.
Which is going to be something we're going to be addressing later because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have some adjustments to going into effect August 3rd, but we're not going to dig into that today. All right. knock out these last two just as a cursory overview for the housing production and the fair share housing targets, which I think are reporting capacities. At least the
Yeah.
second one is.
Yeah, I'll be brief. The housing production omnibus is a big bill, but essentially the goal here is to break up the housing production trust fund to try to to focus more on housing preservation and restrict the mayor's ability to use that money across a number of different programs. It also does a couple little things like, well, it allows it would establish a revolving housing construction fund, a DCHFA. It's probably a good thing. And then, somewhat controversially, it would also allow the DC Retirement Board to invest their funds in DC housing, and that's raised some concerns with some of the unions. So that bill, which was introduced by Robert White and Councilmember Nadeau, some version of that is likely going to be moving forward soon. The second bill here is the Fair Share Housing Targets Act. This would just require the mayor to establish 5-year targets for housing production and affordability. This is something that the mayor has effectively done in the past, but the goal of this legislation is to put some more teeth around those targets for when they're being met and not being met in particular neighborhoods.
Yeah, perfect. Well, as a quick little tangent, so everybody knows next month's webinar, we're going to be talking about 1031 exchanges. Great opportunities to maintain that wealth. I think I've heard it phrased a few different ways, but opportunities to defer taxes is something that a lot of people need to know more about and be able to take advantage of. And so we're firming that up, but anticipate that. And you can scan this QR code to pre-register, but we'll certainly have some additional announcements coming. So prepare for those kinds of questions from a 1031 exchange expert. That is just the fiduciary. They're the ones that are going to be able to make sure that the paperwork's done. Now, this is a quick summary, and we should kick through to the next one. But, in theory, just be mindful of the fact that we're going through all of these basics just because we do recognize that almost everybody's campaigns and everybody's expectations are going to be around more housing production in the coming years. We anticipate that this is going to continue to have more compliance, more reporting expectations, more transparency. But in the end, that ultimately just leads to more professionalism in the industry as landlords and homeowners. And it's not necessarily just a set it and forget it kind of approach any longer. So, it's not that they're going to discourage housing. They certainly want it, and they do recognize the independent individual homeowners that are providing this housing stock is providing a fair portion of that affordable housing. But they want to make sure that it is being done appropriately and effectively. And so a lot of what we're covering is just to make sure that there is that oversight level, right? So let's talk about what this year's election means for housing, because I think that's kind of the precursor to it. But there are a lot of changes, and many of the people may or may not have participated in the primary election earlier. What is it, June 6th, 15th, 16th? But going into November, be mindful of this, right? So expand upon the new political landscape and what to expect and what those campaigns have been centered around.
Yeah. So the primary showed us one real clear thing. This was the first ranked choice voting primary that we've had in the district. And what the primary made clear is that change is coming. What we are experiencing is the largest political shift in DC in the history of home rule. There's no way around it. The voters, whatever you think of how they voted, they were very clear, and every race they moved in the same direction. So we're going to have a new mayor, a new congressional delegate. We're going to have 2 new at-large council members, Melissa Silverman and Oye Awolowo, and a new Ward 1 council member, the former chair of the Democratic Socialists, Aparna Raj. And we also going to have new leadership of the DC Democratic Party from Free DC. And because of everybody's musical chairs in the races, we can also expect that next year we're going to have a new Ward 4 council member. We may have a new Ward 8 council member, and we're going to have a third new at-large member. So there's going to be a huge turnover in the council, turnover in the administration, turnover in Congress. And in all of those races, the outcomes were significant shifts to the left. And none of these races were particularly close. There were larger than expected margins of victory in every competitive race on the ballot. And so I think what that shows us is a couple of things. There's the local elections reflect backlash against the federal policies that we've all experienced. But underneath that, there was a real focus on affordability and housing production as well. The candidates who had the boldest messages on those issues tended to win. Almost every candidate on the ballot, and this is a positive, supported expanding housing production and home ownership. But there is a much higher risk of regulatory burdens. Many of the winning candidates supported policies like expanding rent control and re-expanding TOPA. And so there's some real risks there for our industry about what that's going to look like. And what that means for us as an association and for all of us as an industry is that we need to stay informed. Advocacy is more important than ever. We need to be engaging with these new folks coming in to explain the realities of our industry, and we need to be aware as the policy landscape and political landscape are shifting under us. What's happening? How can we be successful in this space? And if there's going to be any harms to our industry, how do we mitigate those as best as possible?
Well, I can't expand upon that with more than a couple of words, but advocacy does matter, and having those relationships and certainly being in the know is going to be critical. And so, for those who haven't taken my prior warnings, I mean, I would, and those do-it-yourself landlords, and even if you do have another management company, do spend some time reviewing your leases, making sure that your licensing is up to date. Review those utilities that are being billed, either that you're paying or that the residents are responsible. But as far as tracking those legislative changes, you can hear it just based on this conversation that the local DC Board of Realtors and with Shawn at the helm, we are on top of it, and we are working to keep track of anything that comes down the pipeline, have an influence, have a word, have a say, and be able to make sure that what is coming out when it does become law, that it is thought through and methodically placed, at least as far as trying to keep that equilibrium between owners' rights and those of the tenants. And so, as far as it goes, this tagline's true. Being unaware is becoming greater than the cost of being prepared, right? Know what's coming on, know what's going through, and we are doing that on a regular basis, and thus the reason that Shawn spends so much time at the Wilson Building, participating in the language, providing testimony, and then ultimately, in some places, influencing those bills. So our goal is to help you stay informed. And I hope that you find that we are well versed on a lot of these legislative updates, and welcome the opportunity to partner with you. So, Shawn, first and foremost, thank you so very much for joining us. I know that we are a little over time, but I also wanted to leave some questions for the tail end. And one thing that we didn't touch on, and I meant to bring up earlier, was and I'm going to just call it the rent freeze ballot initiative, which I know has gotten a lot of press. It probably could have been on a prior slide, but where do we stand with that?
Yeah, so the DC Association of Realtors and our partners across the industry have been fighting against a proposal to freeze rents in the district for 2 years through a ballot initiative, and then to freeze rents for 1 year every year in the future when inflation CPI is above 5%. So some community folks have put forward that proposal. We've been fighting it on constitutional, legal, and procedural grounds at the Board of Elections. We have also now filed a court case about this litigation, raising our concerns. And so right now we're expecting that if we're not successful, that ballot initiative would be on the ballot for the special election next spring, not in November. And we are involved in both litigation and also legislative reform at the council with a coalition of our partners to try to avoid this taking effect. We believe that this kind of 2 year rent freeze now with costs going up for housing providers and then the chance for perpetual rent freezes in the future is bad policy, is going to really hurt our bottom lines and is going to impact our ability to create and maintain housing in the district. And so that's the message we're trying to do. Your association is fighting in every way we can to keep our housing market stable in DC.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you for that extra. Now, I had invited anybody to add a couple extra questions, and I'm sure that there may be more. But for those that might be thinking about it or typing, I'll knock out a couple that are already posted. Terry, thank you for the question about the pet breed, size, and weight restriction. Will it supersede condo pet restrictions? And I think that the easiest way, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Shawn, but condo policy can't supersede DC law, right?
That's right. And so these are this is legislation that's been incorporated is being incorporated into the Rental Housing Act. And so to the extent that you have a residential lease and a tenant in your condo, then this law will apply, and your condo policies would have to conform to the law.
Yeah. And Shawn expanded upon what you're allowed to charge earlier. You can do the math. $1,000 unit, 1% charge. That may have an adverse effect on whether or not more people allow pets in housing because of the charges that are allowed to be posted. But that's an independent decision. Obviously, I am very well aware that many people do have pets, and you have to make a decision on what makes sense for you. I always talking to owners to ask about what the building's rules allow, because if there is a potential conflict between the building's allowances and DC law, you got to be a little more careful in what you're going to be marketing. And then at the same time, because a lot of buildings do have pet restrictions, they may also have something about the size and breed and weight and right. For those who have leased out a condo before, double check it. And if you don't think that you can be in a compliance, then I would tread lightly and make sure that you're adhering to the law. But that's one thing. And then of course there's going to be a secondary conversation about the insurance and that capacity, and we're not going to dig into that just yet. But second question was about the expanding upon my comment about the shortage of judges handling eviction cases. Um, Understanding that there is a shortage of associate judges, but there's not a shortage of magistrate judges. My point was more along the lines of something that an attorney that I had as a guest late last year, I believe, had mentioned that they have 3 times as many judges, but are handling about a half of the workload. And so it was more just an open-ended question, and I don't want to misquote him, but I do recognize that there has been delays in hearings. In fact, some cases it can be months um, before you get that next court date. And so I don't know if you want to tackle that question more in depth between the difference between the associate and the magistrate.
Yeah, I won't speak to the difference between the associate and the magistrate. What I will say though is that when you go and you talk to the Superior Court, what they will tell you is that their capacity is severely constrained, and that their resources across the board for staffing and the number of associate judges is insufficient for our size. The bottom line here though is that the challenge for the district government in doing policy is that our court system, unlike in states, is not an instrument of local government, and we don't have control over the judges that are being appointed. And whatever control that we once had through advisory bodies has been eroded significantly recently. And so that means that we're sort of at the whim of an institution in doing some very important aspects of our justice system and our administration of our laws that isn't accountable to our residents in the way that it is in other places. And so, you have very reasonable questions about, whether or not there's ways they could be doing this, either with going back to in-person hearings, which allow for easier settlements, that would expand their capacity. If, they were more efficient with the resources they had, maybe they would move faster. It's hard to say. They will say that they're doing the fastest they can, and this is the outcomes that we're getting. But the outcomes we're getting are not acceptable. So,
Right. All right. Well, you know what? I probably will be working with another attorney as a guest, one that focuses on landlord-tenant affairs in the upcoming months. So I'll be able to put those questions to the side and be able to revisit them with ones that are practicing and know and can tell us what they're seeing in the courtrooms. So thank you very much for all that have joined. Shawn, I can't thank you enough for covering all this and doing what you do day in and day out. I really appreciate you giving this extra guidance and expanding upon it for those who have joined us. And I'm looking forward to hearing what else is to come, even though I suspect that it's going to be a quiet August, right? And then coming back pretty strong early this fall, right? So
Absolutely. And thank you
awesome.
again for having me.
Thank you all. Talk soon.